Once upon a time, in a city where glass towers kissed the clouds and wealth spoke louder than truth, a wedding was about to begin. A wedding everyone believed would be perfect. The groom was a billionaire. The bride was admired. The guests were powerful. And yet, the most important voice that day belonged to the poorest woman in the room. No one noticed her at first. She wore a simple uniform. Her hands trembled as she held a tray. But with one sentence, everything stopped. Who was this maid? Why did the billionaire freeze when he heard her voice? And what secret had been hidden behind wealth, silence, and pride for so many years? Stay with this story, because not all truth wears fine clothes. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Richard Hale was not born into money. He clawed his way up from nothing, through sleepless nights and deals that others feared to make. By the time he turned 40, his name commanded boardrooms across 3 continents. He built shopping centers, invested in technology, owned properties people only dreamed of visiting. But Richard did not trust easily. Control was his armor. Emotion was his enemy. He had learned early that vulnerability invited loss, and loss was something he refused to accept. So he built walls, not just around his fortune, but around his heart. Love to Richard was not about passion. It was about compatibility, stability, strategy. And when he decided it was time to marry, he approached it the same way he approached business. Margaret Lowell was the logical choice. She was elegant, educated, poised. She understood the world he lived in. She never asked for more than he was willing to give. She never pushed him to feel what he had spent decades learning not to feel. Richard believed he had chosen wisely. He believed the wedding would be flawless. He believed nothing from his past could touch him anymore. Margaret Lowell had been raised to be perfect. Her mother taught her how to sit, how to speak, how to smile even when her heart was breaking. She attended the right schools, made the right friends, and never once stepped out of line. By the time she met Richard, she had already learned that love was not the priority. Security was, respect was, appearances were. Margaret did not ask Richard about his past. She did not need to. What mattered was the future they would build together, the image they would present to the world. She knew how to play her role. She had practiced it her entire life. On the morning of the wedding, Margaret stood in front of the mirror in her suite, adjusting the lace on her gown. Her reflection was flawless. But when she looked into her own eyes, she wondered if anyone truly knew her. She pushed the thought away. This was not the day for doubt. This was the day everything she had worked for would finally come together. Clara Bennett had worked at the Grand Meridian Hotel for 6 years. She cleaned rooms, served guests, and disappeared into the background whenever someone important walked by. That was how she survived. Invisibility was her shield. Clara had grown up poor. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father left when she was 8. By the time she was 14, Clara was working after school to help pay the rent. She learned early that people like her were not supposed to speak unless spoken to, that their struggles did not matter to those who lived above them. But Clara had a memory that would not fade. 18 years ago, she had been a young girl living in a small apartment on the edge of the city. Her mother had worked for a woman named Helen Hale, Richard's mother. Helen had been kind, warm, the type of woman who remembered birthdays and brought soup when someone was sick. Clara used to sit in the kitchen while her mother worked, doing her homework at the table, listening to Helen talk about her son. Richard had been different back then, softer, before the empire, before the armor. Helen used to worry about him. She used to say he was working too hard, pushing himself too far, forgetting what mattered. And then Helen got sick. Cancer. It came fast and cruel. Clara's mother stayed with her until the very end, holding her hands when Richard could not be there. And on one of those final nights, Helen had whispered something Clara never forgot, something she carried with her for 18 years. The Grand Meridian Ballroom glittered like a palace. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting warm light over hundreds of white roses and gold-rimmed chairs. The city's elite had gathered: business moguls, politicians, celebrities. Everyone who was anyone had come to witness Richard Hale's wedding. Clara worked quietly in the back, refilling champagne glasses, clearing plates, staying out of sight. She had not expected to be assigned to this event. When she saw the name on the schedule, her heart had stopped for a moment. Richard Hale, the boy Helen used to talk about, the man who would become something else entirely. Clara told herself it did not matter. The past was the past, she would do her job and go home. But as the ceremony began, as the music swelled and the guests stood, Clara felt something shift inside her. She watched Richard walk to the altar. His face was calm, composed, unreadable. Margaret appeared at the far end of the aisle, beautiful and serene. The officiant began to speak, and Clara's hands began to shake. Clara did not plan to speak. She told herself to stay quiet, to let the moment pass. But as the officiant asked if anyone had any reason why this union should not proceed, Clara felt the weight of 18 years pressed down on her chest. She thought of Helen, of the nights her mother had stayed late, holding a dying woman's hand, of the promise Helen had made her swear to keep. Clara set down the tray. She stepped forward. Her voice was soft, but in the silence of that grand hall, it carried. "Mr. Hale, your mother wanted you to know something before you married. She asked me to tell you if I ever had the chance." The room went still. Every head turned. Richard's face went pale. He stared at Clara, and for the first time in years, the armor cracked. "She wanted you to know," Clara continued, her voice trembling, "that your father is still alive, and that he's been trying to reach you for 15 years. Silence. No one moved. No one breathed. Richard's jaw tightened. His hands clenched at his sides. Margaret turned to him, confusion and shock flickering across her perfect face. The guests whispered, but Richard did not hear them. All he could hear was his mother's voice, all those years ago, telling him his father had abandoned them, that he was gone, that they would never hear from him again. The officiant stammered, unsure how to proceed. Margaret stepped closer to Richard, her voice low and sharp. What is she talking about? Richard did not answer. He could not. His mind was racing, pulling him back to a childhood he had buried. His father, Daniel Hale, had left when Richard was 12. One day he was there, and the next he was gone. No explanation, no goodbye, just silence. His mother had told him Daniel chose to leave, that he did not want the responsibility of a family, and Richard had believed her. He had built his entire identity around that belief. He became the man his father could never be: strong, successful, unbreakable. But now, standing at the altar in front of hundreds of people, that foundation was crumbling. Clara stood frozen, her heart pounding. She had not expected this reaction. She had thought maybe Helen had told him before she died, but it was clear now. He had no idea. Margaret's voice cut through the tension. "Richard, say something." He turned to her, and for a moment he looked lost, vulnerable, human. Then the mask returned. "I need a moment," he said, his voice tight. He walked off the altar through the side door, leaving Margaret standing alone in her wedding gown. Richard found himself in a small sitting room off the main hall. His hands gripped the back of a chair. His chest felt tight. Clara appeared in the doorway. She hesitated, then stepped inside. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I didn't mean to ruin your day. I promised your mother I would tell you. She made me swear." Richard's voice was rough. "My father is dead. He left us. He wanted nothing to do with us." Clara shook her head. "That's not what happened, Mr. Hale. Your mother told me the truth before she passed. Your father didn't leave because he wanted to. He left because he had to." Richard turned to face her, his eyes hard. "What are you talking about?" Clara took a breath. "Your father had a gambling problem, a bad one. He owed money to people who didn't forgive debts. They threatened your family, threatened you. So he made a deal. He'd disappear, he'd take the blame, he'd let them think he skipped town, and in return, they'd leave you and your mother alone." Richard's throat tightened. "That's not possible." "He tried to reach out," Clara continued, "for years. But your mother thought it was safer if you believed he was gone. She thought if you hated him, you'd move on, build a life. She didn't want you looking for him, didn't want you getting pulled into his mistakes. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. But before she died, she regretted it. She told my mother everything. She said if I ever saw you again, I should tell you that your father never stopped loving you, that he's been clean for over a decade, that he's been trying to find a way back to you. Richard sank into a chair. His hands covered his face. Everything he had built, every decision he had made, had been shaped by the belief that his father had abandoned him, and now that belief was shattered. Margaret found him there 20 minutes later. She stood in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Are you coming back?" she asked. Richard looked up at her. "I don't know." She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "Richard, I don't know what that woman said to you, but we have 300 people out there waiting." "I know." "So what are you going to do?" He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I need to find my father." Margaret's face hardened. "You're going to walk away from this wedding to chase a ghost?" "He's not a ghost. He's my father, and I've spent my entire life hating him for something he didn't do." Margaret stared at him, and for the first time, she saw the cracks in the man she thought she knew. "If you leave now," she said slowly, "I won't be here when you come back." Richard nodded. "I understand." She turned and walked out. The wedding did not happen that day. Richard Hale walked out of the Grand Meridian Hotel and drove to the address Clara had given him, an apartment on the edge of the city. His father answered the door. Older, grayer, but still recognizable. They stood there for a long moment, neither knowing what to say. And then Daniel Hale, the man Richard had hated for 30 years, began to cry. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." Richard did not say anything. He just stepped forward and embraced his father for the first time since he was 12 years old. 6 months later, Richard and Daniel were rebuilding their relationship. It was not easy. There were hard conversations, old wounds, painful truths, but they were trying. Margaret moved on. She married someone else a year later, and Clara continued working at the Grand Meridian, still invisible to most. But Richard never forgot her. He made sure she was taken care of, because sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important truth. If you were Clara, would you have spoken that day, or would you have stayed silent? And if you were Richard, could you have forgiven a lifetime of pain once you learned the truth? Let us know in the comments. What would you have done? And if this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Sometimes the truth we fear the most is the truth that sets us free. Thank you for watching.